Hello, everybody. All right, I'm gonna move my desk because I'm gonna need whatever. I'm gonna need more space. Oh, there we go. All right. So today, like I said in the title, we're talking about range of motion, tempo, and injury prevention. All of these things go hand in hand. We want to maximize our range of motion to get the most out of our reps. Um, while also staying within a safe range. We want to use tempo again to get the most out of our reps, but also as a way to control the movement to reduce the risk of injury. Together, these things and a couple other principles that I'll share are going to help reduce risk of injury substantially. All right, so um, that's our topic for today. Let's start the call off with some wins. Everybody share your wins. Let's hear what's going on for you this week, and then we'll start talking about the topic at hand here. My win is that my amazing girlfriend bought me a few months of coaching with, well, her coach, but also now my coach, which is really exciting. So it's been fun starting up with him this past week. Getting my first week of training in with a coach again. It's been long overdue and very much appreciated to get started. So that's my win. Excited for that. And we'll hop into the conversation here. So range of motion. There's a few different things that we want to pay attention to here. So obviously for some simpler movements, this is a pretty easy thing to kind of figure out. Like if we're doing a bicep movement, I would say I got my arm anchored here and I'm doing curls this way. This is as far as I can go, right? I'm not going any further than this. Pretty straightforward, single joint movement. Only one thing is moving, which is my elbow. Now, when we're talking about something maybe a little more complex, like I'll start with the next tier up would be like a shoulder press. We start with the weight here. We're pressing up. Our shoulders are moving and our elbows are moving. Right? Obviously, we want to stay here. We're coming down to a normal range here. It's hard to go overextending in this sort of position, but what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that now we got two joints moving. Right? We got the shoulder joint moving. We got the elbow joint moving. Then when we throw in something like a squat, a compound movement, we got all kinds of joints moving, right? So let's see if I can get enough space here. All right, so when we're squatting, hip joint, knee joint, can't see my ankles, but my ankle joint's gonna move too. And we're also watching our back because your back can move, right? So we've got like a whole lot of different joints moving. And with something like a squat, we could stay in a safe range of motion with our hips, but then we could be in an unsafe position with our back. Or, we could be in a safe position with our hips and knees, but we could be overextending our ankles. Ankles tend to be the limiting factor on squats. So it gets a little bit more complicated depending on the movement that we're working on, right? So that's just kind of a little bit of. I'll talk about more about that to make it a little bit more clear. But essentially, what we want with our training and what research shows, and it's not. I would say for everybody here, it's a blanket rule. There's a purpose in using limited ranges of motion. We're getting more into like bodybuilding specific type stuff when we're talking about that. So for our purposes here, maximizing range of motion is a blanket rule across pretty much every exercise. We want to get as much movement out of that muscle as we can. We want to stretch it as far out as we can and contract it as far as we can. It uses the most amount of energy, stresses the most amount of fibers in the tissue. It's just the most bang for your buck when you're doing a rep. You can do 100 bicep curls like this, but maybe 10 if you're going full range of motion. Right. Um, the other thing that this gets a little complex, so I'm not gonna talk about it in too much detail. But we're also looking at like thinking about the line of tension. A lot of reason why people stop short on their movement is because the weight's too high. So if I'm doing a bicep curl and a here, let's do it this way. All right, so let's say I'm doing like a preacher curl, right? I've got the weight in my hand, and the line of tension is directly down with gravity. When I'm down here, my muscles fully lengthened, the weight's down at the bottom. I have the least mechanical advantage to be able to get that weight back up, right? It's all the way down there. The pivot point is my elbow, it's above my hand, so the weight is at its full capacity down there, putting leverage against my elbow. This is a hard position to move the weight from. If we're here, we still have a lot of load because it's pushing straight down, and we've got the pivot point here. When we're here, now we have weight that's going to displace through our forearm, and it gets a lot easier from here up because now my motion is almost more horizontal with the weight rather than vertical, which is the bottom portion, right? So if you're struggling to get full range of motion, it could be because the weight's too much at that length and range, in which case it is better, it's humbling, but better to decrease the weight and be able to get that full stretch position. Now, how do we do this safely? There's a few joints in the body, like our shoulders, which can do circumduction. It's not like our elbow is, it doesn't go side to side, it locks out. It's pretty stable. Our shoulders are not as stable, right? So, let me think of a good example. I mean, for men, it's chest flies. We're doing a fly like this. We want to make sure that we're not overextending. But I'm trying to think of a relevant example that everybody here would be using. Um, we can even go back to something like a bicep curl, but I don't want to do that. So let's just talk about chest for simplicity. All right. So um, when you're testing your range of motion, now you know what? Let's do squats. We can do squats. So I'm going to lower the camera here. Now, when we're doing squats, obviously, pull my sweater tight here. When we get down, oh, now you can't see me. Desk is in the way. Here we go. Okay, so we're squatting down. We want to get like below 90, so I might get my butt behind or below my knees. And the problem that a lot of people have here is this happens. The lower back rounds, or you get what's called the booty wink, where same thing, it's happening to me there, but you just can't see it because the camera's not good enough and I'm not wearing the right clothes for it. But the pelvis, it comes down and that butt winks. Whoop. You've probably seen that. That is too much range of motion. All right. With weight, like that's as far as I can go without weight. And I know where my safe distance is before I get that booty wank or my low back rounds. Both often happen at the same time. And that's actually how you're going to test your range of motion. When I have weight and I have that compressive force, of course I can get deeper. I can go further, like I could go a couple more inches from there, but that's not my natural range of motion. That's not what my body is capable of doing on its own. And so if we take the body and we put it in a position that it's not able to get to like naturally, we're forcing it into a deeper position. And in that deeper position, muscles are extra stretched out, and we're then at risk. That's what puts us at risk of injury, primarily with when we're talking about range of motion. Right. So just being cognizant that your body under tension, of course, can go into more range of motion. So for every movement that you're doing, it's a good idea to test the movement with no weight or like very like if it's just the barbell, 45 pounds probably isn't going to force you into too much of a deep stretch. Um, but check your range of motion on your own first with just what you're capable of doing, and then mimic that. You can even set, like if it's squats that you're doing, you can get like a prop, like a, I know this is, you're not going to have this at the gym, but you can find something at the gym like a rolling pin or something like that, or a stool, have like the plyometric things. If you want to be, if you're nervous about going into too much depth, find where your comfortable range of motion is naturally, and find something that kind of marks that spot. So when you come down, you can just tap your butt on it and go, oh, there's my spot. And you come back up. That's going to keep you in a safe range of motion so that you don't end up with any sort of overstretch injury. All right. And then I just really want to hammer home the point that we want to get to a full stretch position. You should feel a nice light stretch at the bottom of your rep. So um, there's a one kind of exception, which is shoulders. We don't need to come down all the way down here for a shoulder press. Shoulders are the exception where it's okay to just come to here. We don't need to go all the way down. Just come to a little bit below your shoulders and press back up. That's okay. Everything else, when we're doing tricep extensions and you're pushing down on the rope, don't just stop here. Let that come all the way up, and you're stretching. Where's my arm? Stretching your triceps out, right? You want to keep that elbow fixed because it's a single joint movement, and bring it all the way down, all the way back up. Otherwise, you're just shortchanging yourself, and you can be getting more out of your workouts for what's going to feel like the same amount of effort, but you're going to get more out of it. So it's to your advantage for sure to really maximize that range of motion. The other thing that I want to say about that too is you want to try to get to that like shortened range of motion. So biceps, you're trying to get that as like to its most shortened position, and squeeze. Like for your shoulders, when you press up, squeeze your shoulders. Don't just move weight A to B. Move it with intention. Squeeze, and then come back down. Press, squeeze. And you're thinking, this is the mind muscle connection stuff, right? You're thinking of really contracting that muscle as hard as you can so that you can get the most out of it. If this is something that you are going to have to apply because you're learning something today that you haven't been doing, it will be humbling and you'll have to drop the weight, and that's okay. You're better to have less weight and let go of the ego, and get the most out of it, because you'll grow faster and you'll get to that weight sooner than if you half rep or less, just because you're trying to move further and further. And this is a good kind of warning. When we're tracking progressive overload, we can get fixated on the numbers. Casey and I have done this ourselves. I think I might be a little bit more prone to it than she is, but I'll chase the next number. I'll chase the next progression, and I won't notice that my form starts to maybe deteriorate a little bit. And then the big one is my tempo. My tempo falls apart. And tempo we have for multiple reasons, but tempo is going to be one thing, again, to get the most out of your reps. We program the tempo specifically and specific for each movement. There's movements where we want to add a little bit of a stretch at the bottom and a hold. It's uncomfortable, and there's a purpose to that. But in terms of injury reduction, our tempo is what controls the movement so that we don't end up with uncontrolled movement. If you're doing a shoulder press and the weight's just dropping down, or this is one that I see in the gym all the time, please don't do this, is you come down and you bounce the weight back up. What's happening is you're putting yourself into an overstretch. You're stretching the ligaments, and like an elastic band, you're stretching it out and it's snapping back to give you that extra little oomph. You'll see it with people doing, you'll see it with squats. Because people will go all the way to the bottom and they'll kind of like they'll slam down and they'll come back up. And it's really dangerous because you're stretching out the muscle beyond its capacity. You're stretching ligaments and tendons, and you're using the recoil to help you get back up out of the hole. Um, see that also with I see it with trying to think chest press movements a lot. See it with even not as much with back movements. Um, you see it with shoulder press movements a lot as well. Um, Anywhere where you can hit like a dead stop is where you're at risk for doing that certain thing where you're going past the range of motion and you're rebounding yourself up. It's very dangerous. So the tempo eliminates that, right? If you're following the tempo count, you have to, when it's a zero, it's still a split second. It's not zero as in like nothing. It's zero as in like you come down, you stop, and you move again. If you're making sure that the movement is sectioned so that you have four different parts of the movement, you have the stretch position, the concentric where you're actually lifting the weight. Concentric is when you're against the resistance. You have that shortened position, the contracted position, and then you have the eccentric, which is where you're resisting the resistance on the way down. You're trying to lower it. Right. This is where people screw up the most is the eccentric. Um, all four of those parts of the movement, you should be at a dead stop at some point. So if you're doing a bicep curl, you're following the tempo, dead stop. Coming up, dead stop. Coming down, dead stop. Right? You're not just doing down up, down up, down up. We don't want to do that. We want to keep the tempo really, really controlled. Think about it. Every tempo that we give you, yeah, I can't think of a single tempo I've ever programmed where where this would not apply. You should have so much control over the movement, especially on the eccentric. We've never programmed a fast eccentric because it's dangerous. That's where if it's too fast, you lose control. You hit that dead stop or you swing or whatever. You should be able to control the eccentric enough that if someone were to yell stop, you could stop. If they yell stop and you travel another 3 or 4 inches, you're moving too fast, right? So I wish I had something heavy enough to actually show you what that would look like. But if you just think about it like doing shoulder press, if you're coming down, you got 1,000, 2,000, like that's pretty slow. But if you're going 1,000, and I'm in the middle and I go, stop, it's too late. You're moving too fast. You can't stop it. But if you're doing the 1,000, 2,000, stop, you can stop it. Stop. You know what I mean? So your tempo is there to protect you and also to amplify your workout. Keep that in mind. You're eccentric. You should always be able to stop on a dime if you need to. That's the control that we want you to have. Of course, as you fatigue, it might be like, stop. You can slow down. You might not be able to stop because you're tired, and that's okay. But you want to be able to control it. You should never be in a place where that movement is like I said, you can't stop it. You can't control it. If someone yells at you, you can't stop the weight. You're moving too fast, right? Now, what happens? Like I said, that's where people end up doing that rebound thing, where they're letting their ligaments and their muscles overstretch and recoil. Is they're not controlled. The weight's coming down too fast. They're going into that overstretch, and they're using the momentum. The other way that lacking tempo screws you over is you end up using even like there's a bicep curl. You're not coming down to here and like recoiling, but what you will do is come down, swing back, and swing that weight. And now you're not actually curling 20 pounds. You're curling the equivalent of like 15 or less because the momentum is taking resistance away from the muscle that you're trying to train. It's already in motion. And so you're not moving 20 pounds from nothing to go. You're moving you're running up to a car that's already rolling and trying to push it faster, right? How much easier is that? We don't want that. We want to make the work hard. Um, so yeah, that wraps up our conversation. The last kind of thing that I wanted to add in terms of injury prevention and range of motion is with your any sort of compound movement, you're doing RDLs, you're doing hip thrusts, you're doing squats, leg press, any sort of like pretty much most compound movements are going to involve your legs. But you can be doing stuff like, if you're doing an overhead press and you're standing, that can be a compound, or that is a compound movement. Um, you want to be really, really mindful of where your spine is. Like I said with the squats, you don't want your low back to round. You obviously don't want your low back to round when you're doing an RDL or a hip thrust is a little bit harder to feel. But what happens is when people come into, all right, hopefully this chair doesn't roll away from me. There it goes. Let me see if I can back this up against something there. All right, let me show you this here. All right, I'm not going to roll away. So when you come down, what some people will tend to do is they'll then, I don't know if you can see that, I'm doing anterior and posterior pelvic tilt. So right now my low back is arched. And then they come up and they anterior tilt, push their hips up. They come down and then it rotates. So we don't want the rotation because what's happening there, be easier to show you standing up maybe, is doing this and this and this. We want that spine to be stay in a good position. So when you come down into your hip thrust up and you squeeze, not come down, arch the back, and squeeze. Giving you guys a show today. And so keep that spine in a neutral position. The way you're going to do that is embracing your core. If you keep a tight core through the whole movement, like I'm flexing my abs right now while I talk. You can flex your abs while you're doing the movement, while breathing. And that's going to protect your spine. It's not your back muscles that keep your spine straight, it's your core. So keep your core braced. That's where we use the breathing, right? So, yeah, that wraps up our conversation today. Hopefully I wasn't going through that too quickly. If you have questions, ask us in the WhatsApp group, ask us individually in the app there. Shoot it in the comments here. We're happy to help. And send form videos. If you're not sure if your form's good or not, just set your camera up, use the front-facing camera, lean it against your water bottle, get a video from a couple different angles if you can, and send it to Case or I, and we'll take a look at your form and we'll help you correct it if it needs correction. All right, that's it. That's all, everybody. Thank you so much for showing up. If you're watching on replay, #replay. Drop your win, your biggest takeaway, and have a wonderful Tuesday. Bye, everybody.